All right, thank you very much, Joseph Olsen, for that background. Now to discuss matters arising from the President's outing at UNGA 76th Assembly. Let's welcome via Zoom, still in New York, the Honorable Minister of State for Environment, Ms. Sharon Ikazo. Honorable Minister, pleasure to have you with us this morning on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, and also joining us via Zoom is Mr. Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity. He was with the President on this trip. Femi, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Yes, I join you to say good morning, Nigeria.
All right, and here with us in the studio is Ambassador Usman Sarki, his former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations and Directing Staff at the Nigerian Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, NIPS. Your Excellency.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Good morning.
All right, so let's begin with the Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina. Femi, of course, we've had you join us in conversations from New York when the President himself was at the UN General Assembly, and for the 7th consecutive year, he has participated. Of course, last year was virtual. You've had the opportunity also of witnessing the President in his various outings in New York. What was different this time?
Well, I would just say that every year has its uniqueness. And this year was unique in that after last year, the world could not congregate physically and it had to be done virtually. We were there again physically. So the President stood up to be counted among world leaders. And when issues of global significance were being discussed, Nigeria also added its voice. So that for me was the greatest significance, that Nigeria's voice could be heard among the Committee of Nations when issues of global significance were coming up.
All right. Good to hear that, and it's great to also have a physical assembly this time. You are so excited. I see that on your face, which of course gives us another indication of what to expect from Mr. President's outing. But tell us, what really is impressive with our outing?
Oh yes, the many meetings and then the general debate. We had got there on Sunday last week, and the President began to have bilateral meetings with some world leaders and UN officials. Issues of mutual significance to Nigeria and the other countries were discussed. And then on the day of the general debate, President was there and he made his presentation. And from the feedbacks I've received around the world, I think all those that listened to him were quite impressed with Nigeria's statement, because what the President gave was actually Nigeria's statement, our position on different issues, climate change, terrorism, security, trade, and the COVID pandemic particularly. So there were many issues that Nigeria added its voice to, and like I said earlier, it was quite significant.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Femi Adesina. Let's also bring in now the Honorable Minister of State for Environment, Ms. Sharon Ikazo. Honorable Minister, well, right from the opening statement by the UN Secretary General, it was clear that the question of climate change would be one of the cardinal issues to engage world leaders at this year's 76th General Assembly. And President Muhammadu Buhari also made a speech with regard to matters around climate change. For you, and therefore for us as a country, what were the major takeaways from the president's intervention during the general debate?
Okay, I mean, the president stated clearly that climate change is already with us in Nigeria. And it also triggers conflict. It affects food security, drying up of the Lake Chad, youth migration, and loss of livelihood for our people. Before the General Assembly debate, the president had participated in a side event, tagged Transformative Action for Nature and People. This was convened by a coalition of about 70 countries, of which Nigeria is a member. It's called the High Ambition Coalition for Nature. And their job is to tackle biodiversity loss all over the world. And you find that biodiversity and climate change go side by side, as we're losing our biodiversity in terms of our trees, forest cover and all. It's all affecting climate change. So tackling the two is the way to go. And the president made that clear in his speech and mentioned how he had approved 10 new national parks. These were from existing forest reserves in Nigeria. And all the efforts Nigeria is making in tackling biodiversity loss and climate change. You're aware that Nigeria is taking over the presidency of the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall is that initiative of the AU to create a belt for forest cover across the Sahel region in Africa.
Okay, Honorable Minister. I'd also like for you to talk to us about the President's speech on transition to low carbon economy and how it was received.
And how?
And how it was received.
Oh, it was received very well. Nigeria is one of the global champions for energy transition. And the president also participated in the high-level dialogue on energy. Nigeria is actually one of the few countries who have come up with an energy transition plan that we intend to launch at COP26. That's the Conference of Parties on Climate Change coming up in Glasgow. And to me, one major outcome from this is that, ever since we signed the agreement, the Paris Agreement, Nigeria has seen clear commitment and support for our country, to access equitable finance for us to be able to transit to a low carbon economy.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Honorable Minister of State. We will return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's come back now to our Abuja headquarters studios, where Ambassador Usman Sarki is here with us, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to United Nations. Familiar territory for you, but watching from afar, what are the optics that you have seen, and what have you heard?
Thank you very much, and let me commend the earlier speakers, Mr. Adeshina and the Honorable Minister, for informing us about the goings-on the ground in New York. What I will add is that it is very important for us to understand that the annual General Assembly meeting is a commitment, reaffirmation, and reiteration of the importance of the United Nations to global governance. The issue of multilateralism is a transcendental issue that involves collaboration and cooperation among and between nations. Heads of state and government go to the United Nations to bring this commitment, the national commitment, to global governance and to upholding the principles, the ethos, and the Charter of the United Nations. And what are these principles? First of all, the maintenance of international peace and security. Secondly, the promotion and protection of human rights. And thirdly, advancement of sustainable development. These are the core issues that the United Nations deals with. And nations are expected and even required to commit themselves to these principles. So if you look at the general theme that runs through all the statements of the heads of state and presidents at the General Assembly. They cover these three areas globally. And what is of great significance is the commitment to the advancement and implementation and achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The 17 goals and 163 targets encompass the totality of global challenges and objectives that are needed to impel or propel the human society, human beings to higher levels of harmony and development. So I think what the president has done, our own president, His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, is to convey the collective will of the country to the global community to assure them that Nigeria is a partner for good in upholding the Charter of the United Nations and bringing on board the specific Nigerian, West African, and African dimension to contributing to the development of the global community. So it is not an exercise in futility, but it is actually an exercise in building global resilience underpinned by hope, which is the theme of the United Nations General Assembly this year. So his speech, actually, he began by commitment to multilateralism and expressing concern about the challenges posed by COVID-19. And he went on down the line to specifically address about 6 or 7 key issues. And one of those key issues is issue of peace and security, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and the call by Mr. President for the global community to implement the provisions of the Arms Trade Treaty. And I think it's very important that we give vent to these items that he has raised in his speech.
I was going to ask you, it's a good thing you talked about the Arms Trade Treaty. Yeah. I was going to ask you, in terms of, if you were to evaluate, in terms of content and solutions that, Nigeria preferred, at the Assembly, beside conveying Nigerians, the collective, desires and wants of Nigerians, does the president's speech also address the issue of global peace, and equity, to which all UN member states are committed?
Yes, he actually, without specifically mentioning the SDG 17, Mr. President reiterated the call for global partnerships, and that is SDG 17 actually.
Yes.
So he said there is need for global partnership in ensuring that peace and security prevail everywhere. He particularly referred to the condition in our region where terrorism is still reigning in some parts of the country and the Sahel. And he asked for global support to governments in the region, particularly Nigeria, that is facing the threat of terrorism, to combat terrorism. And he now spoke about the percolation of small arms and light weapons into our country through various entry points. And the interdiction of this flow of arms is one solution to reduce and eventually to eradicate terrorism. And I think it's very important for us to realize that no matter what you do, the manufacturers of small arms and light weapons have a responsibility to actually know the ultimate end user of the guns and ammunition they are providing. And the ATT, the Arms Trade Treaty, actually has made provisions for the containment and curtailment of free flow of weapons. And where we had difficulty, because we led the African group in negotiating the Arms Trade Treaty in 2014-15, was the actual issue of sale of ammunition. That is bullets and shotgun shells. This is an enormously profitable area, and the manufacturers of these materials, they do not want to see restrictions imposed on the sale, supply, and global transaction on ammunition. And I think we have to target these things within regional mechanisms, ECOWAS, African Union, in order to see that compliance is ensured towards effective implementation of the ATT.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Sarki. Let's return to Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to the President. But Femi, one of the key issues the President raised has to do with the rollback of democratic governance in West Africa in particular. And the UN Secretary General was also on the same page in his own speech, talking about the rise of undemocratic governments in different parts. So we are grappling with what's happening in Guinea. We also know Mali. There was an attempt some time ago in Niger. So tell us, what generally is the global, if you like, global mood with regard to the rollback of democratic governance in some regions of the world?
So thank you. The general mood is that it is not appreciated, it is not welcome, and it is worrisome. And one thing that further reinforced this position is that in the bilateral meetings that the president had, apart from the general debate, that issue came up in almost everyone. He had meetings with the UN Secretary General. He met with the Queen of Netherlands. He met with the Prime Minister of Netherlands, met with the President of Burundi, met with the American ambassador and permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield. All of them spoke about the incursion of the military into governance again, particularly in Mali and in Guinea. And the president was emphatic. It was not welcome. ECOWAS was looking into it. AU was looking into it. But then one thing the president did not forget to emphasize in all those meetings was that in some of those places, sitting presidents also contravened constitutional provisions. Some manipulated their constitutions to get terms that were like illegitimate until they wangled themselves into it. So Mr. President was quite categorical that it was not a good thing to do. But then coups and military takeovers are also not welcome. So he enjoined the rest of the world to look into this. But the onus will also be on the leaders, particularly African leaders, to respect the constitution of their own countries. The president emphasized in the private meetings that when you respect the constitution of your country, you are also respecting the people. And when you tamper and manipulate the constitution, you are disrespecting your people. So it was something that the world was worried about, and it was something our president was emphatic about. It should not be welcome, it should not be encouraged, but the is also on sure that they do the right thing at all times.
Okay, thank you very much, Femi, for that. I wanted to jump to another issue, but I would like Ambassador Usman Sarki to also speak on this whole issue of the erosion of democracy in different parts of the world, but more particularly for us in West Africa. Now, this is the catch. The president, of course, complained about the democratic erosion. And the president also, as it were, got an assignment from the UN to say, continue to be the policeman for West Africa. We have never shied away from that. But at what cost? And who bears the cost?
Well, that is a very valid, legitimate question and concern. However, Nigeria has actually the onus to play a leading role. Whether we like it or not, we cannot shy away from that in West Africa, and not only in West Africa, but in the entire African continent. Number one, to set example politically in terms of upholding democratic principles and practices. And secondly, to direct the course of action in the region towards compliance with protocols and treaties and decisions taken by heads of state and government in ECOWAS. So there are ECOWAS protocols on that prohibits actually unconstitutional changes in government. And commitment to that will have to come from the leadership of countries like Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, and others in the region. that have committed historically themselves to democratic rule. So it is not a matter of cost and benefits, but actually it is a matter of principle that Nigeria should lead. Nigeria ought to lead without even being told by anybody to see that, you know, the entire West African terrain has been made conducive to democracy. The other issue, of course, is democracy, human rights, peace, and security are intertwined. So if you separate them, you are going to have instability in the region. You are going to have chaos and destabilization. And that would undermine sustainable development. So the interconnectivity of these forces makes it imperative that Nigeria actually leads the region in terms of ensuring there is stability politically, there is peace and security, and there is the observance of human rights and democratic principles to ensure that a level playing field has been given to everybody. How do you, for instance, actualize the free movement of people in the region and goods and services if there is no peace and security, if there is no stability in the region? It will become virtually impossible. And West Africa is not insular. We are now going to be part of the African free trade, the continental free trade agreement or area. So if we don't have the political foundation established and firmed up in our region, it will be difficult for us to play a part commensurate with what SADC, for instance, will play. SADC is completely a democratic, region where no military coups as such have been experienced, where threats to democratic rule have not taken place. So when we go to the larger African family, we are now going on the wrong foot if we go with the baggage of military intervention, terrorism, insecurity, and instability. So we have to look at ourselves in the larger picture of the entire African continent.
But you know, Ambassador Saike, I know that the Honorable Minister is still waiting, but you know, the key point that was also raised in the course of the President's address has to do with the imperative of leaders themselves respecting their own country's supreme laws. Yes. But this cannot be imposed from outside. So which again tells you something about the challenge that some African countries would face to say, look, you know, we have our constitution, this is what it provides. Yeah. So why finagle with the constitution? We have seen Cote d'Ivoire appears quiet in the meantime, but we saw what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. Now we saw what happened in Guinea and what the consequence has been. Yeah. What can the international community do? And in this case, say the contiguous states, say Nigeria as leader in West Africa, when a leader is verging on dangerous territory that might result in some political conflagration.
Quite, you are very right in terms of the personal inclinations, the idiosyncrasies of leaders in terms of perpetuating themselves against the Constitution and the rule of law. Now, let us remember the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM. It provides for internal assessment of the rule of law in every country, and the principles and legalities involved are actually, spelled out in the commitment of African leaders to rule of law, to democratic governments, and to the constitutive act of the African Union. Based on that, the African Peer Review Mechanism will now look at the way internal reflection or implementation of these principles are taking place. So where there are breaches, African leaders themselves in conclave, for instance at the African Union, will point out to their peers that what you are doing is wrong, don't go along that route, don't go along that road. And this is the way of bringing back people from the brink. So what Nigeria should do is to revive, reactivate, and strengthen the APRM as a way of compliance mechanism towards democracy, civil rule, constitutional rule, and rule of law.
All right, thank you, Ambassador Seriki. Let's go back to our Zoom connection and join the Honorable Minister of State for Environment, Sharon Ikezo. let's talk about the impact of climate change and loss of biodiversity, which Mr. President harped on. And he also called for the urgent intervention of the United Nations. But are there areas of probable intervention? Did we present areas of probable intervention on our side?
Yes, there are areas of intervention, like conservation, for instance. I had mentioned that the president had approved 10 new national parks. So with these national parks, we increase our forest cover. Then also the Ministry of Environment, it's also conducting a lot of intervention projects. For instance, in the wetlands of Hadejia and Guru, we're trying to rehabilitate those wetlands, to improve the livelihoods of our people. Then also we plan a national mangrove restoration project. Nigeria is a coastal country, and our mangroves have deteriorated over the years, and these mangroves are carbon sinks. And also the livelihood of our people depends on these mangroves. So these are areas that we're all intervening in, and also through collaborations and alliances we have in terms of biodiversity, we're tackling all this. Then also the Lake Chad Basin, we're working closely with Ministry of Water Resources to see how the Lake Chad can be resuscitated, in conjunction with other countries around that Lake Chad Basin. Because if we don't tackle the climate change issue, the livelihoods of our people are affected. We'll keep on having conflicts between herders and farmers. And also, our youth will keep on migrating from the rural areas into the urban areas because of effects of climate change on their farming and their livelihoods. So these are basically the interventions we're working on, and we intend to do more of that.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much for the points that you have raised. Earlier, you did say that Nigeria will shortly assume the presidency of the Great Green Wall. What would that mean?
Yes, the Great Green Wall is an AU intervention for planting trees across the Sahel region and also restoring land. Nigeria has already restored about 4.9 million hectares. And out of this Great Green Wall, we will also be able to provide alternative and sustainable sources of livelihood for our people in those areas. At the same time, we will promote dry land agriculture for them, provision of water and irrigation in those areas. And a lot of our youth will be engaged as the forest guards, in planting of the trees and also protecting the trees.
My question, Honorable Minister, has to do with Nigeria assuming the presidency. We've been hearing about the Great Green Wall for some years now, and you have indicated that we planted a little over 4 million hectares. What is the coverage area? Which states have been covered, and what do we know about future plans to extend the wall across the entire northern stretch of the country? But in particular, becoming the president of the Great Green Wall, what would that do for us?
That should be able to help us attract more funding for what we're doing. And Nigeria, once we take the lead in most of these things, we'll be able to get it done better. We have 11 frontline states that the Great Green Wall project is covering. These are Zamfara, Gombe, Bauchi, and several other states in that belt. I can't remember all of them off head now. But hopefully with that leadership, we should be able to drive the Great Green Wall project, to achieve its objectives.
All right, let me return to Femi Adesina, who is also joining us via Zoom. Mr. Deshina, earlier on you talked about the bilateral meetings that Mr. President had on the sideline of UNGA, and you mentioned Netherlands, and I know he also met with the U.S. representative at the UN, and also met with, I think, Venezuela and all that. My question is, amidst our wants, the many wants of Nigerians, amidst the need for foreign exchange and the economic diversification, was meeting these countries in the right direction?
The question part of it, can you come again with the question part?
Was meeting, if you consider areas of need, you know, agriculture, we, of course, we need to, you know, our economy is transiting to, transiting from money economy, diversified into the agricultural areas and all that. And if you also consider the value of our currency and all that, meeting with these countries, Netherlands, Venezuela, what is the impact? What is the direction? What are we trying to achieve?
Okay, thank you. Basically, appearance at UN is a multilateral meeting, a multilateral outing. That is why the other meetings are called sidelines, because they are bilateral in nature. When you hold bilateral meetings, you discuss things that are of mutual benefit to your country and to the country you are meeting with. And that was the nature of those meetings. One thing that ran across these meetings, apart from illegitimate change of government in some West African countries, what ran through the meetings again was Nigeria's response to COVID-19. Almost all the leaders the president met with, including the permanent US permanent representative to the UN, the question they were asking was, how were you so successful in tackling COVID? It ran through the meetings. So it shows that they wanted to also learn from what Nigeria did and possibly replicate it in their own countries. And the president was always willing to share what Nigeria did that made COVID not as virulent in Nigeria as it was in some other parts of the world. I brought that up to show that the intention of these meetings was to learn from one another. And apart from COVID, there were issues. For instance, Burundi, you know, Nigeria is a lot more blessed than Burundi. So the Burundi president asked for help for his country from Nigeria, technical help. He asked for help in the area of oil. He asked for help in the area of prospecting mineral resources in his country. He asked that Nigeria should send them experts who can come and exploit the mineral resources they have in their country. The Queen of Netherlands was particular about a Greek in Nigeria. She said they would want to help Nigeria, particularly in the rural areas, but her concern was infrastructure. He said without roads, without rail, it would be impossible to help in the rural areas of Nigeria where they were interested in. And the president asked her, when last were you in Nigeria? She said, 2017. And the president told her, please come again. Please come again, and you'll be surprised. You will see that between 2017 and now, we have made progress. We have not done all that we should do. Not all areas are accessible, but we have made progress between 2017 and now. So all this goes to emphasize the fact that those meetings are for mutual benefits. What Nigeria can do and what those countries can do for us. And I think a lot of progress will come from those meetings, because in these meetings you had the bureaucrats who will take the minutes and will follow up on such discussions. So I believe Nigeria has a lot to benefit from those meetings.
Thank you, Femi Adesina. Let's come back to the studio. Ambassador Serke, I know you want to make a comment on the president's speech with regards to climate change and the environment. Yeah. But again, you listened to the Honorable Minister of State talk to us about what the intention, or what will accrue to Nigeria if we assume, presidency of the Great Green Wall. Yes. What are your perspectives?
Well, the important thing is we look at the totality, the total package of the global framework on climate change, and develop national implementation strategies, mitigation strategies, including financing. Now, financing is very key to mitigation. There is financing out there in the international community dedicated to combating the effects of climate change. But you have to build strategies. You have to develop mitigation strategies in order to go and seek for funding. The Federal Ministry of Environment, Federal Ministry of Science and Technology, Water Resources, and in fact all the ministries will have to now put their heads together with the state governments and local governments to come out with national strategies for mitigation of impacts of climate change. And then go to the EU, for instance, led by Germany, where billions of euros have been earmarked for the converting to assistance to developing countries, to go to the United Nations itself, to seek for funds and for technology to mitigate the impacts of climate change. In Nigeria, the greatest climatic and environmental danger is the constant and virtually the demonic way we are destroying our environment, the forests, cutting down trees. There is no measure or action you will take in Nigeria today to mitigate climate change if you do not attend to the issue of cutting of trees. Deforestation. Deforestation takes place faster than perhaps anywhere else in the world, in the Sahel and in Nigeria today. Do you know the amount of charcoal being exported from Nigeria to the Middle East, to America and other countries? Nobody is checking that. Do you know the amount of hardwood that is moved from central Nigeria today in containers? They call it rosewood or something, that go to China. Nobody is actually stopping that. Do you know the amount?
There was a moratorium, if not a ban, on the export of rosewood.
Yes,
sometime.
yes.
I don't know whether it's been enforced.
But are we observing it?
That's a good question.
Know. Yeah. We don't know. And you cannot actually, stop the cutting of trees if you do not stop the manufacture of charcoal for export and for domestic use. And you cannot stop the use of charcoal domestically and firewood if you do not provide substitute.
Exactly.
So gas manufacturing, we are virtually swimming or floating on gas in this country. But today I understand, I read somewhere that the cost of gas, cooking gas, has escalated. There are companies in Nigeria that produce cooking gas. One of the companies that I know is called Nido Gas. It was established in the 1950s, before even the independence of Nigeria. But Nido Gas today cannot access gas to produce gas as an affordable cost to supply to Nigerian homes. So for me, the Honorable Minister of Environment should immediately convene a meeting of gas producers in Nigeria. Ask them what is their problem. Is it the access to the raw gas, or is it access to storage facilities or to finance? And then she will now intervene at her very high level to see that their issues are resolved so that gas can become affordable. Egypt is virtually a completely dry country, but every household you go in Egypt is actually supplied with natural gas. Why can't Nigeria be so retrofitted and gas made available even at the level of villages?
Ambassador Sake, you raised very pertinent issues. We would like the Honorable Minister of State Environment to respond to what you just said. Honorable Minister Sharon Ekazo, well, on Good Morning Nigeria, we've touched on the subject matter of the escalating cost of LPG, that's liquefied petroleum gas. A number of factors have been adduced for this. One, they say it is the VAT on it, which is 7.5%. Others also indicate that, oh, there are no storage facilities to take the gas, and then, of course, low production and all kinds of issues. But we have seen that when you have price rises of this nature, the hewers go into the forests and then keep cutting down our trees, which will obviously, make nonsense of the gains that would arise from tree planting and other environment saving measures. The ambassador here with us, has raised a number of proposals. What are your reactions?
Okay, well, what he's talked about is almost keying into our energy transition plan. Nigeria, we also committed to a gas expansion program, which cuts across different areas. And one of them is residential clean cooking, because if we don't implement the clean cooking initiative, we will not be able to protect our trees. The idea he talked about with the Minister of Finance, it's something we're looking into. We also have a target of impacting at least 30 million homes with residential clean cooking. This is all part of our energy transition plan that we have worked out. And Nigeria is actually one of the few countries who have come up with that transition plan. But for us in Nigeria, gas will definitely have to play a key role. I think one of your moderators here asked about the low carbon economy that Mr. President talked about. This ties into with our national decarbonization plan as well. So we're committed to removing a lot of Nigerian urban residential sector from the grid and putting it into renewable energy power in their homes. But the issue of gas, we hope through our energy transition plan to start implementing that in conjunction with the Ministry of Petroleum as well. So it's an area we have on our plan that we're going to work with. And also, apart from tree cutting, we're going to be involved in a lot of conservation efforts, replanting of trees as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Okay,
yeah.
I want to stay with you, Honorable Minister of State. You talked about your energy transition plan, and I'm tempted to ask, because I know in 2017, if I'm correct, we made our own nationally, determined contribution to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We agreed to reduce our gas, greenhouse gas emission by 20%.
Yes,
yes. So,
almost.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead. I'd just like to know where we are at the moment.
Okay, yes. We've just submitted our nationally determined contributions to UNFCCC. And we're committed to reducing our CO2 emissions by 20% unconditionally and 47% conditionally with support from international partners. And our NDCs as well, we've expanded it to waste and water as well.
Sorry, what does that mean? I don't quite understand your explanation, Honorable Minister. You said we're almost hitting our target, unconditional target?
Yes, our unconditional target of 20% by all the projects we have put in place.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Minister. Back again to Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to the President. Nigeria also added its voice to the canvas, if you like, for more equity in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccine. This is a comment that we've been hearing since, of course, the vaccines were developed for COVID-19. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala says that just about 4% of the African population has been vaccinated. In our own case, we also know that total population vaccinated is less than 10%. But what did you read as the body language of the advanced countries that have developed these vaccines? and in some cases are almost achieving herd immunity on account of the numbers that they have been able to vaccinate. Is it like, look, it's your business as a developing world, or okay, we will come to you at some point? Are we required now to take our destiny into our own hands?
No, I don't think that is the thinking. Like I said earlier, in the various bilateral meetings the president had, the issue of COVID also came up. I remember the Queen of Netherlands remarking that Nigeria used a great part of our GDP to combat coronavirus last year. And part of the discussion was, in whatever way we can be helpful, we will be. The American Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who incidentally has spent about 3 years in Nigeria before, was also quite interested in what was happening in the country, the level of vaccination, how Nigeria succeeded, so to speak, so far in combating coronavirus. And she said that the Delta variant, particularly in New York, where we were then, was very, very virulent. And she said that was why America was virtually insisting that its public workers must be vaccinated, because America is getting to that level where they're saying public workers must be vaccinated, otherwise no admittance to public offices and all that. So I don't have the impression that Nigeria was being left alone and Africa was being left alone. No. Like the president said in his speech, the safety of each person is the safety of every person. Because they know that if Africa lagged behind and they took care of themselves, the world is a global village. It's just a matter of people coming in and going out, and there's contamination again. Therefore, there is this feeling of togetherness in the world. Our collective humanity needed to be taken care of. So we are our brothers keepers. We are looking out for one another. The president spoke about the COVAX facility and expressed the appreciation of Nigeria to all those who have assisted. No, there's not that feeling that we have been left alone. There is rather the feeling of mutualness, togetherness. We are in this together and we will crack it together. That's the sense I got from the outings.
Okay,
yes.
all right. Femi is optimistic. The key issue actually has to do with the availability of vaccines. There have been commitments. I know President Joe Biden of the United States did say they were going to release some 500 million fresh doses to the developing world, I believe Africa. If that came into Africa for a first dose and a booster dose, that would be 250 million. Probably just 7 parts of West Africa and not the rest of the... But it's an optimistic viewpoint to say that, okay, the rest of the world is not going to leave Africa behind. But in terms of timelines, how do we move from just 4% vaccine coverage now to double digits?
All right, Kingsley, I think, are you putting that question to Ambassador? Ambassador, we'll just keep you on hold. Let's bring in the Honorable Minister of State for Environment just before she takes her leave. Honorable Minister, you talked about the programs of action which has taken us to almost meeting, unconditional targets to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I'd like for you to speak more on that because the last time I checked, gas is still being flared in the South, and other, conditions that, give rise to gas emission are still there. So I just like for you to give us more details on some of those programs just before you leave.
Okay, you're talking about gas being flared, and that the emissions are still there. In other words, you're at the back of your mind, you're thinking of the race to net zero by 2050. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What we'll have to understand in Nigeria is that gas will have to play a critical role in our national development. We're talking of decarbonization, and the target is for 2050. That is the agreement. But for us in Nigeria, for some time, we'll have to use gas. We plan to end gas flaring. We plan to trap most of the gas that is being flared for commercial use. This is coming up. But in terms of our NDCs that we submitted, we have also covered areas of emissions from other sources besides gas. I hope that answers you.
Since you must leave us now, we have no choice but to allow you.
It's 3:30 a.m. here. I'm trying so hard.
Yes, we know. We do apologize. We do apologize, Honorable Minister. So we wish Kingsley, you don't have other questions.
We'll be back to have this conversation on our NDCs as we prepare for COP.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great, Honorable Minister.
Yes, definitely, so that Nigerians have a clear understanding.
That'd be great.
Of NDCs, yes, what we submitted.
That would be great, and I also hope that you'll find time to join us right here in the studio. Honorable Minister of State for Environment.
Definitely. Thank you.
Sharon Ikwazo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's take a short break now. When we come back, we'll continue with the final lap of our conversation on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We still have Ambassador Usman Sake here with us in the studios, and Mr. Femi Adesina also joining us via Zoom. Ambassador Usman Sake, one of the issues that President Muhammadu Buhari raised in his address at the general debate had to do with debt relief.
Yes.
And some commentators say that's a curious request to make. Relief from whom now? Who are the creditors that we are targeting?
Yes.
Are these multilateral credit agencies, or are these private creditors?
Yes. Well, the issue is that, these are general comments. In such high-level meetings, you state the outlines of the principle of the issue without delving into the granular details. But it will be assumed that, both aspects of creditors will be addressed in terms of whether they're institutional, like World Bank or the European lenders, or private banking lenders. But it will be difficult to expect waiver or debt forgiveness from private lenders, because that is their business, and it is, you go there with your eyes open to borrow in order to bring back money, financing and funds to do something in your country. And that project in which you are actually, plowing money is supposed to generate money to pay back the process. However, on the basis of principle, such remarks could be made. But if you look at Mr. President, if you read the statement, he made the call not only on behalf of Nigeria, but he said on behalf of least developed countries, developing countries, and small island states. And these are countries, not all of them are resource-rich countries like Nigeria that could afford to pay back. A lot of them are struggling even to really balance their national budgets. So Mr. President's call was a generic call, much more humanitarian call in terms of alleviating the impact of debt on small countries, on countries that are struggling to actually make their economies, to make ends meet. So it is something to be supported in principle. So when we engage with the WTO, with World Bank, with African Development Bank, with the IMF, we develop strategies towards reduction of the fallout of debt in terms of perhaps prolongation of the repayment, the reduction in the payment of interest. There are various ways to mitigate the challenge of debt repayment. So I think it was a timely call, not necessarily viewed against Nigeria's increasing borrowing, but views against long-term prospects of economic development of countries, particularly developing and least developed countries and small island countries. that do not have the capacities, the resources, and the wherewithal to repay these sums, which will ultimately become a terrible burden on future generations to bear.
I said, Ambassador, that I'd like to take you back to the issue of arms trade treaty, which Mr. President spoke about, emphatically.
Yes.
He also appealed to the UN, members of the UN, to ensure that it is well implemented.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, because given the veto power, that some members have,
Yes.
and when there is a decision is taken on, arms disarmament, with the veto power, is it possible to achieve any form of, reasonable disarmament?
Well, let us separate the arms trade treaty from the global disarmament process. Disarmament usually refers to the idea of, number one, non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and secondly, reduction and elimination of existing nuclear weapons stockpiles. So Mr. President's address, actually, we should see them at two levels. One, at the level of small arms and light weapons and their proliferation, and secondly, at the level of nuclear disarmament. So the arms trade treaty actually now refers to the manufacture, sale, circulation, distribution, purchase, and availability of small arms and light weapons, basically. We negotiated that in New York in 2014, 2015, and Nigeria was the first country, or among the first countries actually, to sign the treaty, in 2015. We went to Trinidad and Tobago. We led the African delegation to negotiate it, and we came to Dakar, Cairo, Senegal, to flesh out the West African framework for the implementation of the ATT. So Nigeria is deeply committed to the ATT, and that is why Mr. President deemed it fit to raise it in his speech. And if you now implement the provisions of the Arms Trade Treaty, it will effectively provide the legal framework, the international framework for, number one, a reduction in the flow of illegal small and light weapons, and number two, to check the illegal flow of ammunition, with which usually the guns are activated and kill people. We have seen how bandits, so-called bandits, are acquiring sophisticated weapons in Nigeria.
Will it check, will it stop them from accessing?
Well, if it is implemented, number one, the manufacturers will be held accountable for actually the free flow of their weapons. And the mercenaries, or people who trade in arms, will also be liable. They will be criminalized. And then the availability, illegal availability of arms itself will become a criminal issue within the national jurisdiction. And beyond that also, the tracking of small arms and light weapons will become a national issue. And that is why you have national commissions on small arms and light weapons. And I think Mr. President established the commission, he formalized the commission either last year or this year. Yes, so the task of the commission, together with all the security intelligence agencies, is to ensure the effective monitoring of the flow of illegal weapons. But my concern in Nigeria is that it is very scandalous even to see the amount of weapons available out there, in the hands of criminals, gangs, and bandits. No self-respecting country should allow the free flow of weapons into its country, into its territory. We read that the security agencies have interdicted or caught people trafficking arms, container loads, but we have never read, at least on my part, the prosecution of these people. So I think there should be vigorous and effective prosecution of people engaged in trading in arms, no matter what status they occupy in the country, because this is an existential threat to Nigeria's peace and security and to its unity. So without addressing this issue within the normative sense framework provided by the ATT, you may not succeed.
You call for, we just have a few minutes. You call for prosecution of whoever that is caught, with this one.
Yeah.
What about those who lay down these arms?
Yes. Well, still...
To voluntarily lay down these arms?
Well, it is the onus of the security agencies and the intelligence to even investigate how they came to acquire the weapons in the first place. Laying down is part of a process of surrender, of amnesty, and so forth. But they have to go back to trace the source of the weapons, to actually, register the weapons, to look at every weapon has its registration mark. So you have to now follow it to the source and ask the manufacturer, weapon so-and-so with registration number, so where is the provenance of this weapon? And that is how you show seriousness and commitment, and to hold the manufacturer and supplier to account.
And that would also require cooperation from other West African countries. Because part of the major challenge that we face with the flow of illicit weapons has to do with sometimes a nonchalant attitude of Nigeria's neighbors. Let's return to Mr. Femi Adesina to get his closing thoughts, as it were. Terrorism, terror financing, and recovery of looted funds. These were also issues that echoed from the meetings on the sidelines. Are we on any more sure footing now with regard to busting the terror financiers?
Yes, it's an issue that came up at the UN, which the Attorney General of the Federation addressed. He spoke about it at the side meeting, and I think he also spoke to the press. He unfolded the progress we were making in terms of taking alleged financiers of terrorism before the law. And he said investigations were on, and quite soon they will be arraigned. The issue of name and shame came up, and he said, of course, you don't just talk about naming and shaming without having a prima facie case against the alleged financiers. And of course, when they are taken before the courts, their identities are known. So it's just not to name and shame and then you get no result out of it. It's to take them before justice and get them punished for their infractions. So it's an issue that Nigeria is on top of. And I believe that we are going to see salutary developments in the weeks and months to come.
Special advisor to the President on Media and Publicity, joining us via Zoom. We'd like to appreciate you as always. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you.
All right, just one last word from Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much. Going back to the ATT issue, the small arms and light weapons, I think, very respectfully, I would recommend that Mr. President, since he has come back to Nigeria and raised this issue in his statement, he should direct the ministers of foreign affairs, ministers of defense, ministers of interior to develop a framework whereby there will be a West African meeting of their counterparts to address the issue of small arms and light weapons and the effective implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty in our region to curb the free flow of weapons and ammunition. If that is not done, the entire gains of this administration will be wiped out by indiscriminate availability of weapons and the surge in insecurity, not only in our borders, but across the Sahel region.
Ambassador Usman Sarike, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations and Directing Staff at the Nigerian Institute for Policy and Strategy Studies, NIPS. Your Excellency, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at sports now.
Well, we also have to thank Femi Adesina. Femi Adesina, I hope, is still hanging out there. Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity. A deep appreciation to you for your contribution.
Okay. My pleasure.
All right, let's take sports now.